SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa is well positioned to enable investment and trade across Africa. Speaking at a high-level working dinner held at Investec's headquarters in Sandton, Ramaphosa indicated that the country is seeing the green shoots of an emerging economic recovery. The event brought together leading South African CEOs and global business leaders to discuss strategies for driving investment and trade across the continent. We're now joined by SABC News economics editor Tshepo Mongoai for more on the B20 South Africa Summit that is taking place at the Sandton Convention Centre. Tshepo, let me hand it over to you.
Right, thank you very much, Leanne. Of course, we are at the Sandton Convention Centre here in Johannesburg, where the B20 is hosting its summit, bringing together the business constituency, CEOs, the Chamber of Commerce, representing various businesses from around the world. And of course, there's been some convergence in terms of thinking among the business community on what is it that they do expect from the G20. And of course, one of the critical issues was the just energy transition. Of course, we are now joined by Abel Sekau. He is a task force member of the Just Energy Transition. He's also with the Sanlam Alliance. Thank you very much for joining us, Abel. And the issue of just energy transition and its financing has been one of the thorny issues in terms of who must foot the bill when it comes to the transition.
Thanks, Tshepo. I think this has been a long-standing agenda item globally, because it started from a COP. If you look at the COP, Copenhagen issues, where the financing of the transition debate started there. And I think we are at a critical junction for who needs to carry the bill for financing. And if you look at the need in terms of taking away energy poverty on the continent, and what form of energy do we need to engage from a continental perspective, and who needs to finance? Because we know it's tied to the climate change debate, because if we do renewable energy installation at scale, we know it's going to help in terms of reducing greenhouse gases, thereby abating the rise in temperature. So it's not an African issue, it's not a South African issue, it's a global issue. So I think all the financiers globally need to support this, because we know there is capacity to improve, to implement more energy installations from a renewable perspective, from an African continental perspective. And you'll hear, when you attend conferences, that the money is there. But what is the challenge of that money getting to where it's required on the global side? The challenge is, how do we evaluate risk? We are still using the old risk model in terms of financing to say, how do we evaluate some of these large-scale projects that are happening on the continent so that they can be attractive to foreign investors and the donors? So I think with the B20, one of the things that we realize that we have to rethink differently in terms of financing some of these projects, because it's not a question of do we need them, it's a question that globally, we need to implement this project, and as quickly as possible if we need to meet our climate change obligations from a Paris Accord.
One of the issues is the fact that it costs money when it comes to project preparations, so that you can take that project packaged with some costs attached to it and be able to take it to investors. And we find that funding of project preparation is a major concern.
Yes, it's definitely a major concern, because you find that the current requirements in terms of project evaluations and how they need to be funded and prepared, some of those capacity and the skills, we sometimes lag in. But we now have an opportunity to start looking at blended financing, where you bring multiple partners. You bring the philanthropic side, you also bring communities in terms of investing in some of these projects and own some of those projects, to say how then do you structure a project that will be able to mitigate the risk, but also a project that also talks to the pertinent issues of inclusivity. to say when you do this project should be geared towards alleviating poverty, and both poverty from a social aspect and also from an energy perspective. To say these projects cannot sit in communities and communities are left behind. And the financial institutions, like us, for example, in Sanlam, we do have the climate fund managers, which approaches it differently, and we fund some of those developmental aspects of the project to say we know project preparation, no one wants to touch it, because you don't have the foresight to know if that project is viable. You have to take that particular risk, the first lost man risk. And I think we then come up with a solution to say how then do you then start funding that, understanding the impact landscape, not only the financial side, the impact landscape in terms of job creation, but in terms of making sure that people have got access to energy. We sit here, we've got energy, and imagine people who don't have access to energy, how their life can be transformed.
All right, thank you very much. That's Abel Sekau. He's the task force member of the Just Energy Transition. He's also with Sanlam Alliance. Of course, we'll continue giving you more coverage of the B20 in partnership with Sanlam Alliance. Of course, back to you in studio.
SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.